So hello, welcome. This is Headlips on Headphones for another week. My name is Martin Anderson. I should be joined by Zoe Styles, but this week, due to a scheduling conflict, she is unavailable. A scheduling conflict is our 2-year-old, but we won't go into that too much. However, for this week, she is getting a bye. She's not going to be talking about AEW. And you know what? I haven't watched it, so I'm not going to talk about AEW. We are going to talk about Raw. We are going to talk about SmackDown. We are going to talk about Impact. And for the first time in a few weeks, NXT looked interesting enough for me to tune into. So we are going to be talking about those shows. And before that, we're going to talk about wrestling news. When it comes to wrestling news, obviously the big news this week is that both the Bellas had their kids. Congratulations to them. Apparently, and I don't think this is a big revelation for people who know me, I already have 4 kids. Wait, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4 kids. I know sometimes when you have a lot, it gets a bit difficult to count. And then you find out this week that your wife wants to have more. I've already had 4. I'm fine. And I'm not going to go down that route. Anyway, so this week, Daniel Bryan tweeted that he wants to have a match against The Rock because his daughter makes him listen to You're Welcome quite a lot. I'm going to be fair here. My wife makes me listen to You're Welcome quite a lot. And it's a bloody catchy song. I'm sorry, but it's bloody catchy. Now, he did issue a jokey challenge to The Rock, who responded with, "I can see the writing on this wall from miles away. I'll be jobbing again in the spirit of being girl dad. Let's do it, and congrats, brother, on the new arrival. We're thrilled for you, Mama B in the family." So The Rock, a nice guy, at least he messaged back. It's clearly fun. There is some good news and bad news that happens every week for everybody. So let's talk about some of the good news. The Rock bought the XFL. Now, I wasn't going to talk about this, but there are stories out there that he's bought it as a gift for Vince McMahon. I think that's nonsense. The Rock wants to combine the things that he loves. Now, The Rock is a film star. The Rock can appear on wrestling whenever he gives Vince a call. The Rock now owns an American football company. This is where he got his big start. When he left home and went to college, the first thing he did was play American football. So for him to be part of something like this, I think it's a huge deal for The Rock. And for me, if I had the opportunity to own a radio company, if I had the money down the line, I would certainly do it. There's no way on this earth I would ignore the opportunity to own a wrestling company. A, if I had the money, and B, if I had the commercial venues to put this into, I'd be very happy to own it. Anyway, talking about owning it, there is, of course, some controversy, as always, on Twitter. Lance Storm basically talking about intergender matches. Now, for me, I hated intergender matches, and I think I still dislike most of them. I don't think a lot of them tell a good story. I think they're there just for people to, almost like a car crash. You tune in because you want to see what's going to happen between the guy and the girl. Now, for me, Cesaro, when he was Claudio Castagnoli, had a match against Sarah Del Rey. And even when I showed Zoe Styles it, she was watching it going, like, Claudio's having fun here. He looks like he's enjoying doing something you wouldn't get away with in the real world. But he's not treating Sarah Del Rey like she's a girl. He's treating Sarah Del Rey like a fellow wrestler. For us watching that, it was incredible because Sarah didn't look weak. Cesaro didn't come across in a negative way. It just looked like a match between two people. And for me, the light bulb went off. It's not that a man and a woman fighting is a bad thing. It's how certain companies have presented it over the years. And when it comes to the intergender stuff, I know WWE have done intergender matches, but they tend to, when the guy tags out, then the girl has to come in so that you have no interaction between the two of them. There was, of course, Dean Ambrose and Nia Jax, which looked like it was going to become a thing. I think WWE kind of bolted on that when they were a bit scared. For me, intergender stuff can last. It can add some drama to something, particularly if it's two people that the fans care about, not two people that the fans dislike. I think Dean Ambrose was very much over. Nia Jax, even back then, people just weren't really all that interested. But Lance Storm had some comments, and we're going to kind of delve into them and try and maybe tear them apart, because I know a few people are angry with them. And for once, I don't think the anger is well placed in most cases. Not saying people are wrong to be upset by his comments, just perhaps they're taking it in a different way to what he intended. Anyway, so I see some discussion on intergender wrestling. In light of speaking out, I think these matches have to stop. I've heard from so many women who were uncomfortable doing these, but felt obligated to get booked because these matches were the accepted norms. For every intergender match that happens in a top company with professional conduct, there are dozens of women who agree to be booked in a women's on a multi-show loop that gets there and finds out the other women didn't show up, maybe was never booked, and now she has to agree to do intergender matches and be the only woman on the tour or lose all the booking and risk heat from cancelling. There's then pressure to share a room because everyone else is doubling up. This happens. Now, when certain people within the speaking out movement are looking at this, they're seeing it as, you know, the women shouldn't be booked. I know they're looking at the negative side of it. But Lance is speaking as a person, as a former trainer who's had ex-students and perhaps other females come to him in relation to these things and say that, yeah, they are unhappy. There is a lot of change in the command structure in WWE, for example. So women are not forced into locker rooms on their own with other guys and stuff like that. However, I'm sure there's still physical and peer pressure there to take on these matches if they were to happen. And if that still exists at WWE level, imagine how bad it could be at an indie level where, you know, these people need the gig. They need to work. That's the only way they learn. And I'm not aiming this at guys and aiming it at girls. When you're at the indie level, the way you learn is by working more. So if you back out of bookings, then you just get blackballed. I've heard of it. I've got several wrestlers who've actually spoken to me about this when I've been trying to get them to come in and do an interview. And I obviously want to pick at that thread. And that's when they back off and say, well, no, I'm not going to get booked if I talk about this stuff. And then they've kind of backed out of doing the interviews. Now, obviously, people are picking up on the fact that he's talking about women here. So Lance Storm's getting criticised. And one of the comments is, I think it's probably up to the women to decide. Last thing they need is mansplaining. Now, Lance did say in one of the replies, you don't understand wrestling. When you're new, the pressure to do as you're asked is huge. If you say no and you don't get booked, then that's your call. That's my point. I've had many female students who didn't want to do them feel pressured to do them. Lance Storm is getting a lot of backlash on Twitter. And this is an instance where this backlash makes no sense. He's actually talking about supporting the speaking out movement and trying to offer support to these ladies who take on these bookings because they feel they have to. He's not disparaging those who take on the bookings because they enjoy it or because they want to do it. Because there is a market for intergender wrestling and it's going to grow as companies do it properly. Lance is talking about those that don't do it properly. And I think in light of the speaking out movement, I think what's happened is people are a little bit too sensitive. And I'm not saying that people are wrong to be sensitive. Absolutely. People who have been through things are going to be sensitive and they need to be alert to their own approach to things. And sometimes when people say things, you latch onto it and you attach things that aren't really there. And that's one of those instances. Lance Storm, for me, has been very mature and sensible in his comments where he said people have come to him with concerns. The pressure on women to do things, not just intergender. You know, there is stories out there of WWE talents who were asked to do bikini matches who didn't want to do them. Ivory's talked about it quite a lot. But obviously, they have a job. If they keep saying no, then they're not going to get any work. They maybe won't get put on TV for weeks at a time. When you look at the reason we lost Owen Hart is that same pressure. And I know it's not sexual based, but Owen Hart refused to do a storyline involving him cheating on his wife. And as a result of that, he felt he couldn't refuse to do the falling from the roof. I say falling, that's probably coming down from the roof. He felt he couldn't say no to that. So he did it because of how bad he felt about constantly saying no to storylines. For me, that pressure, if it exists for Owen Hart who can say no, then it's going to exist for those people who are lower on the totem pole. Lance, for me, sticking up for the underdog there. Anyway, we'll move on from that because I think I could do an entire show on the speaking out movement because there's quite a lot of meat on that bone. And I've already discussed a little bit how angry that makes me, that mean, I've got a daughter who's a teenager. I wouldn't like the idea of her feeling pressured into doing anything. And I'm not even talking about bad things. I'm talking about being pressured into doing anything. For me, is a negative. But let's move on to some AEW news. Now, we're not talking about AEW on the show this week because obviously Zoe Styles is otherwise engaged. We are going to talk about Sammy Guevara. Now, Sammy Guevara has been getting heat over busting Matt Hardy open on the match. Now, it was a hard way on AEW Dynamite this week. Now, apparently he grabbed the wrong chair to hit Hardy with. Now, AEW had a regular folding chair at ringside. Guevara was supposed to use on Hardy, but it would have weakened the blow significantly and stopped him from actually being burst open. When he was unable to find that chair during the moment, he panicked and grabbed another one, which was much heavier, and that's why Matt Hardy got injured. I've already seen a backlash against Sammy Guevara, and Sammy Guevara's been guilty of stupid comments. I don't think Sammy Guevara is as good as some people think he is. I think he will be. He will get there, and he will be that good. I think he's not there yet, but I certainly think it's, the backlash I've seen on Twitter already for Sammy Guevara hurting somebody, it was an accident. He screwed up. I'm sure Matt Hardy isn't going out of his way to try and get him fired because, they're all grown-ups. Apparently Twitter isn't. The problem with Sammy Guevara is there seems to be more and more things building up. And I think as a company, AEW are handling it quite well. They suspended him, they took him back, and he returned to his old role. He apparently was spoken to after injuring Matt Hardy, but that was it. But it's the backlash on Twitter that seems to be growing. And I think you combine the comments about Sasha with the injuring Matt Hardy. I think the next time something happens, it's going to be under a microscope, and Sammy's going to get quite a lot of backlash growing over the next few weeks. But give it a month, somebody else will be the topic of a backlash because that's how wrestling Twitter works. Nothing lasts forever. And hopefully, I like Sammy Guevara. Sammy's a good wrestler. I think you would definitely ID him if you come in to buy cigarettes or alcohol. But he's certainly a guy who, in 5 years' time, if he sticks around in the business and doesn't go into acting, here's a guy who's going to be headlining main event shows around the world. Now, what that says about AEW in 5 years' time, but he will be main eventing shows around the world. I think in 5 years' time, the wrestling landscape is going to change, and people think AEW is going to become the big dog, or it's going to be a force that competes with WWE. I think in 5 years, we may see a slightly different landscape to certainly what we had, and obviously what is coming in the future. For me, is going to be almost a global network of wrestling companies. So not quite the NWA, but, I think we're already kind of there when we see New Japan and AEW working together. Last year, Ring of Honor worked with Japanese companies. WWE now are working with Japanese companies. So I think moving towards that approach is going to be something that's huge. Certainly, Sammy Guevara is somebody who, if he works in Japan, he is going to be super over. If he comes to the UK and does a tour here, I guarantee you sellout shows. As long as they don't try and book like big football stadiums, I think he's going to do very, very well. Now, AEW Chief Brand Officer Brandy Rose has deleted her Twitter account. It should be noted that Rhodes was heavily criticised over the new AEW Heels membership platform for female fans. They also blasted her for the lack of a women's division in the AEW roster. Do you know what? This is stupid, right? Now, I've been critical of AEW. I've even had interactions with Brandy and Cody where I've criticised the product and they've had their say with me. There's no fallout there. There's no issue as far as I'm concerned. The AEW women's division is horrible. But so is the WWE one. This is not an attack on AEW. There is a desire from me and several others to have a women's division that actually means something. They could have done that, pushing Nyla Rose. I think there is a misconception here. Brandy Rose isn't booking the female division. Allegedly, that's Kenny Omega. And regardless of who's booking it, it does need to improve. I think I've criticised the tag tournament that they're doing because most of those women are not under contract. So you're not building the talent you have, but you're then bringing in uncontracted talent to work on the show. It seems clever. It seems like that's going to help build a solid division and not water the product down quite a lot. Probably is going to water the product down when you add in lots and lots of extra talent, but you haven't actually been getting anybody over. Unless the tournament's designed to specifically get one tag team over, the chances are it's not going to achieve what you want. But it turns out that the real reason that she's deactivated her account might not be all this hassle from fans who aren't happy with the women's division. It might be down to the fact that she left her DMs open, which is an easy fix. But the DMs being open has resulted in her receiving quite a lot of nude pictures. Now, Brandy's an attractive woman. Cody's a very lucky guy. But for people to be sending people they don't know unsolicited dick pics, and let's be fair, I doubt very much she's going out of her way to get dick pics. She's not Stacey Cornett. Now, for me, just leave her the hell alone. I mean, it's one thing to comment on something you've disliked on a show. For me, that's fair game. If you're in charge of a show and somebody comments, you can reply or not. But I don't see the point in sending people unsolicited dick pics. Unless it's my wife. But then that's just to make her laugh. So in other news, Bryan Pillman Jr. has asked for his release from Major League Wrestling. Now, apparently, let's read the quote here. I haven't heard from MLW in a while. I used to talk to them all the time, but they don't answer my phone. I'm sure they're cool and there's no hard feelings. I guess everything that's been said has been said, and they told me I'm free to chase opportunities outside. I think my contract restricts WWE and NXT, and that's it. They know that I know what I'm not allowed to do, and sooner or later, I'm sure we'll try and come to an agreement where MLW will release me. He then says he's fully transparent. Since about June the 1st, he's been actively trying to request his release and free himself from the obligations of MLW. No hard feelings, but they have obligations towards me too. They have to have so many shows take place in order for my end of the contract to be valid. So I think that would also free them up some responsibility as well. So, do you know what? Bryan Pillman Jr., there's still a lot of development for him, but I think that's a guy who, if he showed up in NXT, I think he would do very well. I think if he showed up in AEW right now with the size of the roster they have, he might get lost in the shuffle. Maybe Impact Wrestling's the place for Bryan Pillman to go right now. Spend a year in Impact, joining up perhaps with the Good Brothers, or joining up with somebody, and just being on TV every week might be the best thing for him. Now, as well as news, we are going to talk about some other stuff. So Ariana Andrew, who was Cameron? Yeah, Cameron at the Funkadactyl, has made it clear on the Sipping the Tea podcast with Naomi that she is not under contract to AEW. She's not under contract to anybody. It was more of a one-off appearance. I'm not a big fan of the tag team tournament they're doing. They haven't booked the women's division properly. So to then throw in another 30 or 40 women, it just doesn't make sense. It waters it down. But it's interesting to see that there's more people that aren't under contract. Eric Bischoff has just had a one-off appearance. He's not under contract. Quite interesting to see Eric Bischoff on TNT again, though. But as far as I can see, the one-off appearances take up TV time. It's something that I have a wrestling friend who is against WWE bringing people in for one-off shows. Strangely not as critical of AEW bringing people in for one-off shows. Even when those people coming in for one-off shows happen to be the same people. That, to me, kind of tells you the story of wrestling fandom right now. It seems some people are either picking AEW or WWE, and they'll excuse their company's actions. It's not your company. AEW make mistakes. AEW are getting a lot of things right as well, though. WWE, they get some things right, and they get some things wrong. I think WWE have always done that. But it's because I think the AEW fans are slightly more into their wrestling. And that's probably an understatement, but slightly more into their wrestling, which means that when it comes to WWE, and they have a lot of content that is not necessarily aimed at everyone that is a wrestling fan, the problem is because they're aiming the stuff, let's word it this way, because they're aiming the stuff at everyone, it's not going to please the hardcore fans. whereas AEW don't please some of the WWE fans because it's aimed at a particular audience. So you're never going to. There's very few people are going to be a fan of everything they watch, especially when it comes to wrestling. But when you see how divided the fans, I mean, do you know what? I'm so close to deleting Twitter again that I think I might just do it just because of how frustrating it is to see people arguing. And it's not just wrestling. Some of the abuse that Alfredo Morales, the Rangers player, has been receiving because he could potentially be leaving when the entire purpose of signing him was to sell him on for a lot of money. It shows you how fans can be. They're useful until they head somewhere else and then the scum of the earth. And I hate that. Absolutely hate that. Now, according to Tokyo Sports, WWE is allowing Sari to work in Japan because she's been unable to get to America. She signed in February and was finishing up her dates and was going to join the NXT program. However, in light of all the COVID-19 stuff, she is allowed to work in Japan just to keep her in ring shape, I think. But she's been given permission to work in Japan until everything dies down. So at least from her perspective, she's continuing to work and she is showing, from what I've seen, I've only seen a couple of clips of the stuff that she's been doing. She looks like she's doing well. She's somebody that when WWE started tapping into the Japanese market, it is that old thing of you hear that Japanese wrestlers don't connect with an American audience. You get a great Muta who does, but he's an anomaly. And then you get somebody who comes over as a comedy character like Funaki, and they connect with an audience. But underneath that, there is a lack of connection. However, WWE have done really well. Kairi Sane, Io Shirai, Asuka, Nakamura. Japanese talent are able to connect. It just depends on how they're used. I think in recent years, when it comes to the Western world, we've become a little bit more accepting of different cultures can be interesting and they can be entertaining. I don't need to hear Asuka speak to see a badass in the ring. Nakamura's English, having met him, is a damn sight better than it is portrayed on TV. We had a proper conversation, even though my accent, when I'm not talking into this microphone, is pretty damn thick. Anyway, it's interesting to see WWE allowing people to work outside WWE, knowing that they would be the ones covering the cost if she got injured. But it's also great to see that she's getting a chance to continue working, because that's the best way to learn, as I mentioned earlier. Now, there is a story that I have told Zoe Styles years ago about Bret Hart kicking British Bulldog Full Force in the face at SummerSlam 92. This week there was a SummerSlam 92 watch-along with Booker T, CM Punk, all those lot from backstage. Now, he said that he wanted British Bulldog to slow down during a sleeper hold. When Bulldog tried to rush out of it, Hart said he kicked him in the face. Now, this is Bret Hart's quote, where he said, "I kept the sleeper on him on the ropes for a couple of seconds. When the referee broke it, I was so mad at him for going for the ropes. When you watch it, I kicked Davey right in the face. I kicked him, and I didn't kick him like a real potato, which is a stiff shot, but I kicked him just enough to snap him up. I took my finger, and I snapped him in the nose as hard as I could. I always love watching it because it's definitely a wake-up call for Davey." Now, knowing that Davey had basically went missing and had arrived absolutely wasted, and if you watch the match, a couple of minutes in, if you listen carefully and you're watching as somebody who can now lip read because I'm going deaf, you can see Davey Boy saying, I'm fucked. So, you know, it's an interesting match. If you get a chance to go watch that watch along, it is absolutely incredible. Now, because we're not talking about AEW, I'm going to talk about AEW in the wrestling news section. So during Wednesday's edition of Dynamite, MJF tried to attack Jon Moxley during his championship match with Darby Allin, which had a great Stone Cold Steve Austin style moment in there. However, having not watched the whole show, I can comment on this match, which I've seen. They had a finish, and then they turned it into a false finish and carried on for a period afterwards, which is something that I think is wrong with a lot of wrestling, not just AEW. The finish needs to be the finish. Don't just keep going, because once you've given them the finish and then you carry on, people kind of start losing interest. Anyway, after the show, AEW posted a video of Moxley commenting on the attack. Now, in his promo, Moxley gave some high praise to Allin, who basically was relentless during the match, which is what Moxley was saying, and telling him that he will be a world champion one day. I think Alan's a great character. I think Alan's an above average worker, but I think the character is something that connects. And as far as MJF is concerned, Moxley said he isn't sure what happened, but said MJF has no heart, and even if he did, it stops beating real soon. He's a dead man. Jon Moxley versus MJF has been confirmed for the All Out pay-per-view event. About bloody time as well. AEW have been keeping MJF a little bit under wraps for a while. I don't think he's been in a main event program long enough to justify him getting a world title shot. However, this is the company that said they were going to allow only those who were at the top of the rankings to get title shots. And then Brian Cage came in, won a gimmick match, and then got a title shot. And then they screwed him over by having him lose. Now, according to one person who is in my wrestling group chat, yes, but Taz threw in the towel, so that keeps him strong. The monster still lost his first match. He's still destroyed. Now, I haven't been a fan of SmackDown for a little while. There is some good things on there and some bad things. It's taken a while. I'm coming around a little bit to Bayley and Sasha Banks as champions. I think that I certainly don't like the Bayley character. Sasha is improving, but it's still the same stuff she was doing a couple of years ago. I think they could do a lot more with somebody like Sasha, particularly if they actually eventually do the Bayley and Sasha Banks split. Everybody thinks that Bayley will go back to being a face. I'd like to see it the other way around. Sasha is the face and Bayley is the bully. And we can find out for years that Bayley was always actually the bully. That would intrigue me. But this week, we did also see Sonya Deville cut Mandy Rose's hair in an attack. We saw Sheamus say that he was moving on from Jeff Hardy, which means obviously moving on to a new storyline. It'll be interesting to see who he goes after. Big E versus The Miz. Is this Big E's opportunity at the world title? I'd love it to be an opportunity for him to at least be in the hunt. But it'd be interesting to see what happens if he does get it. I would certainly be happy if he did. What we did, however, see was, for me, one of the best moments that's happened on SmackDown in a while. Alexa Bliss was in the match with Braun Strowman and The Fiend. She was underneath a veil and she was trying to get Braun Strowman's attention. I thought that match sucked. There was very little wrestling, and I get they were trying to tell a story. It was lame. As a cinematic match, it's not the greatest. I would even put Adam Cole versus Velveteen Dream above it, and I didn't like that one. But that Alexa Bliss moment was kind of interesting. So when The Fiend showed up and took out Alexa Bliss, for me, I was like, well, this is interesting. Based on my comments earlier about intergender wrestling, this isn't going to end up in a match. But to see where this goes is going to be fun. Monday Night Raw, well, it did open with Apollo Crews defeating MVP, which means that he's now clearly the champion again. So what they had was they had Apollo Crews come down with the old belt. MVP came down with the new belt. So when Apollo won, he now has both belts. He later cut a promo saying that he was going to put the old one in his daughter's bedroom so that she can see that anything's possible. I like that. Now, I dislike the Hurt Business being the name for MVP's new faction. However, I think it does make a bit of sense, particularly with something that happens later on in the show, which we'll get to in a minute. We did see Kevin Owens do a segment with the Riot Squad members, Ruby Riott and Liv Morgan. And what was interesting here is obviously they're not on speaking terms as far as we're concerned. So Kevin Owens tried to get them back together and get them to talk. What seemed to be an emotional moment was interrupted by the Iconics, which led to a tag match. Now, these guys are fighting enemies. They're not friends again, or at least that's kind of how they're playing it. So that was quite an interesting one. I think there's going to be more to come there as well. We did see Drew come out and cut a promo about Randy Orton, which saw Randy Orton come out. There was quite a lot of digs from Drew, which I really liked, which were clearly based in reality. One of which was the fact that when Drew found out his mum had died, Randy, who could have been one of the guys to support him, actually walked right past him and didn't seem to care. Now, for me, Randy has no duty to console Drew McIntyre. This is just trying to show Randy as being that piece of shit. So for that, it really worked. I'm digging this Drew McIntyre Randy Orton thing. I think it's going to be a great match. I'd love it to be in front of fans, but if this leads to that WrestleMania moment where Drew topples Randy Orton and Randy Orton gets that title run, I'm happy with that. I'm more than happy to see Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre at SummerSlam. I think it's going to be a great match, particularly with some possible interference from people down the line. Now, Nia Jax was suspended without pay, and she had an opportunity to apologise to Pat Buck. Pat Buck is not just an agent, he's a former wrestler. So he's capable of taking these bumps that Nia Jax gave him. However, there was no real apology here. It was just an excuse to beat up Pat Buck and make Nia Jax look even worse. And when I say worse, I'm not having a dig at the fact that she keeps injuring people. What I'm saying is she looked worse as in the character. Not a fan of Nia Jax. I think Nia Jax being on TV, I just skip by most of the segments that she's in, particularly if she's wrestling. But this was done well. I mean, she comes across as somebody who they're trying to do something with her. I just don't know how much they're going to get out of somebody that the fans already know she's hurting people. And like I said about Twitter reactions earlier, it doesn't matter if that's actually the case. Twitter thinks it, therefore it is. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with the suspension. I think that the women's roster on Raw is really, really loaded, particularly when you consider Shayna Baszler and several others. Now, Akira Tozawa defeated R-Truth and Shelton Benjamin to become the 24/7 champion. I would have hoped that Shelton kept that belt. I really do like Shelton. I think him being on TV is great. I love Shelton Benjamin. Sasha Banks versus Shayna Baszler ended in a no contest when Asuka entered the ring. And then Shane McMahon revealed the Raw Underground. Now, it's very weird. It's at the Performance Center, but it's meant to be a nightclub. And at this nightclub, there is a ring with no ropes, and there's some street fighting going on. There's also some exotic dancers on one side as well. So it's an attempt to be a little bit different. The idea was that these guys are fighting during the whole of Raw. And Shane O'Mac introduced the Tauran Daba Kato, who just looked brutal. He's a big guy. But one of the guys that came in and fought later on was Dio Madden. So he's hopefully going to be coming back as a wrestler at some point. Now, let's quickly move back. CM Punk was on the SummerSlam 92 watch-along, and he had some stuff to say about Raw Underground. I absolutely loved it. I want to see Nia Jax in there. They should get more women in there. Let us see some bodies getting broken. The idea that Shane McMahon and all these people would be in the Performance Center for the whole 3 hours and they cut into what they're doing in various segments is pretty cool. 3 hours of no-holds-barred fights and strippers. That's all I want to see. So CM Punk, is he a fan or is that sarcasm? Who knows? But at least on the surface, he kind of was intrigued by it and he wants to see what they can do with it in the future. We then saw Montez Ford, Angel Garza defeat Angelo Dawkins. Then we saw Montez Ford versus Andrade, which was a no contest after Ford collapsed. He did the whole excited thing on the rope and he just collapsed. I think they were trying to play it off as being something genuine. Now, in terms of placement, there's something weird about having somebody collapse and then the next segment has somebody get knocked out in a real fight. It seems weird to me that they would do that. Either they cut something in and they just didn't think what was before it, or 2 segments where people getting knocked out in a row. It just seems to lessen the effect of it. We did see 5 masked assailants right after the second Raw Underground segment, which saw Eric of the Viking Raiders actually get a victory over one of the jobbers that were at ringside. We did see 5 masked assailants set fire to the Performance Center generator. Now, there had been technical malfunctions all night, so this group apparently were meant to debut. It accidentally got leaked. The WWE media team put out an announcement, and then they cut segments that were allegedly recorded that will be aired on later shows. So it's interesting. I remember when me and Zoe were watching the show, she was like, well, that's the thing you want to see during a pandemic where there's been riots, is people setting fire to stuff on TV. I certainly think WWE could have done this a lot better, even if they were tampering with it rather than setting fire to it. But, who knows where they're going. At a time where there's all this tension in the world, you have things that resemble riots, and you have a group of black people talking about how powerful they are. It seems like we are in 1998 again, which is, some people will be happy about that, others won't be. We move on. Ray's obviously not on TV, so Dominic Mysterio has been kind of filling that role. He issued a challenge to Seth Rollins for SummerSlam, which has been accepted. But Seth Rollins and Murphy tried to go after Tom Phillips, who had laughed when the Messiah's team were being attacked. And that led to Samoa Joe standing up and basically saying, we can fight if you want, but, we don't have to do this if you don't want to. It was great to see Samoa Joe getting physical again, even though he didn't actually do anything physical. The second he stood up, I actually went, oh, here we go, because I want to see Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe is somebody who would really help the Raw roster right now. But Dominic versus Rey Mysterio's son, Dominic versus Seth Rollins at WrestleMania. Dominic versus Seth Rollins at SummerSlam looks like it could be a very interesting chance for us to see how Dominic's training's progressed, and possibly we'll see whether Rey Mysterio signed his new contract or not. Now, how we ended Raw this week was with the Hurt Business invading the Raw Underground. And it looked kind of interesting. You saw MVP, Bobby Lashley, and Shelton Benjamin all take on opponents. One of the opponents, I think it was Shelton Benjamin, was the one who faced Dio Madden. And it looked really good. I mean, there was some decent-looking shoot fighting, although we all know it was worked. Unless CM Punk, I want to see where this goes. I'm not going to shit on it yet. I think if they're doing this every week, by week 3, it's going to be stale. So there's something coming from this. Now, I personally believe 2 years ago, 205 Live should have been hour 1 of Raw, just like the Cruiserweights were hour 1 of Nitro. I think that would have split the shows up. We would have got to see an entirely different roster as part of the show. And it would have been interesting, at least for me anyway. Now, let's move on from Raw and let's look at NXT. There is plenty to look at. Dakota Kai defeated Rhea Ripley, but only after Mercedes Martinez came down to the ring. She's obviously now part of the Stone brand. And I think Rhea Ripley losing to Dakota Kai, it's a big shock for me. I thought Rhea Ripley was going to get this one quite easily. But obviously Dakota Kai is getting that push up to the next step. And it doesn't hurt Rhea Ripley. She's involved in a storyline with Mercedes Martinez, which is going to be hopefully a great match, which looks like it'll be on NXT TakeOver in a couple of weeks. Bronson Reed defeated Shane Thorne. Now, Shane Thorne looks really impressive right now. I think he's worked on his physique just a tad, and he's got himself quite good looking. I'm not meaning attractiveness. I think in terms of his ring presence, he certainly looks like he's going to be a star. He was one that I thought was going to be released back in April. I just didn't see anything in him, but he's impressing me recently. Damian Priest would defeat Oney Larkin and Ridge Holland to earn a spot in the North American title ladder match. It was, of course, announced that Dexter Lumis is removed from that match. There is a triple threat match coming next week. We'll talk about that in a minute. NXT champion Keith Lee defeated Cameron Grimes. It was a non-title match. We then saw that Cross was in a video and he had decimated Danny Burch and several other superstars backstage, demanding that Lee give him an NXT title opportunity. I like Cross. I'm not going to criticize Cross. I just think this wasn't the best use of him. If you want to get somebody over, don't do it in videos. Have him make an appearance and get that title shot. He's not. Keith Lee isn't overly going to care if other people are being beat up. So, anyway, Tegan Nox defeated Indy Hartwell. Solid match, but not spectacular. This is the thing. Sometimes TV shows can't be all heading up the way. You need to do this with them. So this was one of those matches where I didn't think it was as good as the rest of the show, but it was still a good match. The Imperium defeated Undisputed Era. Now this one is quite interesting. It was due to the fact that there had been a distraction by what was happening with Adam Cole and Pat McAfee. Now, Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly have every tool in their arsenal to beat the Imperium. However, being distracted because Adam Cole and Pat McAfee were fighting did lead to the loss for them. And that was what was interesting, because they didn't come to the aid of Adam Cole when he got kicked in the head by Pat McAfee. Now, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, several others were out there trying to break this stuff up. But for me, the interesting part was the very last thing we saw before the screen went black was Triple H push Pat McAfee, and Pat McAfee say, "This is not a safe place. What a safe place do you guys have to work here?" So for me, that was quite interesting, quite an intriguing thing to see. I am a fan of Adam Cole. I was hoping that he was going to be called up by now. Now, looking at Impact Wrestling, which I've been very excited by in recent weeks, Eddie Edwards vowed when he won the title he was going to be a fighting champion. He made good on his promise with an open challenge. Heath Slater, would he earn himself a contract by way of a victory over Moose for the imaginary TNA World Championship? Now, I love that it's called that because it's not real. And what announcement did Rich Swann have for the wrestling world on the heels of his injury suffered at Slammiversary by Eric Young? That was what was set for the 4th of August. You had EC3 address the fans. He vowed to win the TNA World Championship and burn its legacy, including Sting, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Jeff Jarrett, and Kurt Angle. He then said, "Moose, you've been warned." Very good segment. EC3 came across as a star, something that I've wanted for a while. He did look very good. That was immediately followed by an interview with other new arrivals, the Motor City Machine Guns, which was Jimmy Jacobs, who is friends with them, I believe. They were in Ring of Honor together. Not the greatest of segments. However, there is a very good rivalry. Josh Alexander and Ethan Page, the North, they're a great tag team. So to see them having matches with Motor City Machine Guns is going to be interesting in the next little while. Wrestle House returned, which was full of the usual jokes from last week, and there was several other little in-wrestling jokes. There was even a little section where they played Got Your Nose. It's childish, but it's funny. There was the open challenge, Eddie Edwards, where he faced off against... Well, it appeared it was going to be Sami Callihan, which made me go, fuck you, Impact. Then Rob Van Dam came from out of nowhere and assaulted the hacker in retaliation for Callihan ruining Katie Form's website last week. Callihan, beaten and battered, still limped his way into the ring for his match with Edwards. And it led to Edwards being the winner over Callihan. Now, again, not a fan of Sami Callihan, but using him to put over somebody that was a major part of a storyline with him before is a solid way to start somebody's title reign. I think the commentary team put over quite well how important this victory would be for Eddie Edwards without overstating it. There was quite a lot of telling of the story, but without kind of trying to go back to it, if that makes sense. You were told about the history without it being the biggest thing. We did see TJP and Falaba versus Rohit Raju and Chris Bay, which was a very good match, and TJP and Ba defeated Raju and Bay. The tag division there, it does seem to have a couple of makeshift teams, but Impact have got the Good Brothers, so that division is only going to grow in the next little while. Rich Swann had an announcement, and the announcement essentially is that he's retiring. Now, I don't know how honest that is. I don't know if he is really retiring, but it came across quite well. He did play the role of the person retiring, but we did then have the Rascals, Willie Mack, and Eddie Edwards help a tearful Swann out of the ring. And they watched as he made his walk up the ramp. Now, Young came out of nowhere, attacking Swann and bashing him, which to me suggests that this story has legs. Which Swann has an injured limb? I'll let you guess which one. But just this idea that it could be going further, I think it came across very well. There is the idea that Rich Swann couldn't cut a promo. I think if you've never seen him cut a promo, watch this show. He cut the career promo, the best promo career he could ever have cut. And as far as people are concerned, that's the one that he's retiring with. I don't think he will be. I certainly think there's a lot there for him. There were a couple of segments in that show that weren't as good as others, but that happens on wrestling. That's just how it works. Personally, I'm a big fan of what Impact are doing, and their roster is so big, they didn't have the Good Brothers on this week. This week, you lucky cats, we have 2 news sections. This news section, obviously, we want to kind of tackle some breaking news as we're recording, and then we also want to look at a long-term story and a new announcement from a Scottish wrestling company. So, firstly, Rey Mysterio. The fans who were hoping to see Rey Mysterio high-fly once more on primetime TNT will be disappointed to learn that the wrestling legend is apparently staying with WWE, which makes sense based on what I've been saying in recent weeks. Dominic is getting a push from WWE. It makes more sense for Rey to be inside the castle pissing out than to be outside pissing in, because that could result in Dominic's push being scuppered. And yes, Dominic could potentially walk away from WWE, but if Vince decides to hold him to his contract, he could be stuck there doing nothing for years, and that's hardly beneficial to his career. So it looks like Rey taking the smart route. He did receive an offer from AEW that did equal WWE's per match offer, but WWE's deal happened to be higher because they did offer more dates. So as of now, Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer mentions he doesn't have a time frame as to how long this deal will be, but it will be longer than his previous 18-month contract, but not the typical 5-year WWE contract they're asking for now. So the last time we saw Rey was at Extreme Rules Horror Show, which was, quite frankly, possibly designed as a way of writing him off TV, and we're in a position just now where he can come back. They've already described that his sight's coming back and stuff like that. So what was quite funny was Rey did make comments after seeing his son take it to Rollins this past week on Raw, and what he said was, "Thank you, son, for defending your father and honouring the Mysterio name," even though that's not his name. "So damn proud of you, and you know it. But it's hard seeing you fight my battles, knowing the risks you're taking." So I've always said that I think it would be really cool if we saw Dominic wrestle under a mask. If he were to wrestle under the Mysterio mask, and potentially they could work as a tag team. But there are so many possibilities here where Rey could retire, pass the name down, where they could work as a tag team, where Dominic could essentially turn on his father as well, which WWE loves doing stuff like that. So Rey Mysterio is in a very, very interesting position. When he does come back, I think it will be hopefully the end of this story with Seth Rollins, and we see that move on to something else. But who does Rey Mysterio work with? I think Rey moving into having a feud with, okay, people are going to think this is crazy, but I would love to see some matches with him and Shelton Benjamin again. They had some great matches on SmackDown 17 years ago. I'd love to see that happen all over again. Now, let's move on to something a little bit darker. Marty Jannety had some recent Facebook posts, not the one about him wanting to make love to his daughter, but the one about him killing somebody. So he alleges that he attempted to kill somebody who tried to sexually assault him as a teenager. Now, let's read the Twitter message, Facebook message, Twitter message. Yeah, it was a Facebook message. "I never told no one this, even my brother Gino, because Gino would have killed him. I didn't want my brother gone. Hell, he'd only recently come home from Vietnam. I was 13, working at Victory Lane's bowling alley, buying weed from a fag that worked there. Not my term. And he put his hands on me. He dragged me around to the back of the building. You already knew what he was going to try to do. That was the very first time I made a man disappear. They never found him. They should have looked in Chattahoochee River. But Winnie, the girl in the pictures that's on the Facebook post, I liked you so damn much, probably my favourite. I promised myself way back then nobody would ever hurt me again. That includes you. I loved you, but you hurt me with your fucking Jamaican jealousy. You can go your own way. I don't need you." Okay, so let's unpack this. He's breaking up with somebody, fair enough. Doing it on Facebook, bit attention-seeking, but fine, it happens. But he opens it by saying, or at least alluding to the fact that he killed a man when he was 13. Why is nobody reaching out and helping Marty Jannety? This guy clearly needs help. So he was advised not to speak to any podcasts. Speaking with Boston Wrestling, Jannety claims the man fondled him in a car when he tried to get away. The man grabbed him by the hair and dragged him behind the bowling alley. He went on to say the man tried to rape him, attempted to pull his pants down before he was able to defend himself. When asked how he got away from his attacker, Jannety said, "He probably doesn't need to say this, but there was a brick laying there." What I said in my Facebook post, because I don't want to lie about nothing, what do you do when you're 13, Jannety said. It was the right thing in that moment. I don't know how else you handle it. He didn't care how big the man was. He was protecting himself. I can't say he deserved to die, but he deserved to get his ass beat. When I was beating him in the head with a brick, I was only trying to beat his ass. I wasn't trying to kill him. Now, I don't know what the statute of limitations are in America, but I can safely say that this needs to be investigated, not just because somebody's relative is dead, even if they may have been guilty of criminal activity. He did close the interview by saying he couldn't believe someone could treat someone as badly as that, and he might have translated it poorly because he lost it. He tends to react that way when girls get jealous and mad at him. Now, he did delete his post, and the Columbus Police Department in Georgia is now looking into the matter. The first steps will be seeing if we have any missing persons or unidentified remains that match the limited information in the post. The department issued that statement to TMZ. It looks like Marty Jannety killed somebody, or at least that's what he's claiming. This is just the end of a long line, hopefully, of posts from Marty Jannety, including wanting to make love to his daughter and various other ones that show this is a guy that just needs help or needs social media taken off. But somebody needs to step in and take charge of this. WWE have a wellness policy. WWE have the ability to look after people. It would be great if they could step in here and look after one of their former employees. They certainly have the funds there to do it. So, I have been critical of the approach of ICW. There has been several people who have been a little bit confused as to why the boss of ICW deleted social media, and there's been very little in the way of an official comment from ICW. Now, as of Thursday, the 6th of August, ICW did release a statement, which I'm going to read here, and hopefully will allow ICW to make clear what their stance is moving forward. Now, it's clear that, on one hand, they should have commented earlier, but also, from their statement, it's clear that they have been doing a lot behind the scenes and they have worked on making sure they have something in place that's a little bit more meaty than some companies have. So, let's read the statement, and then at the end, I'm going to make a little comment on this because there's still a few things that are concerning. We have used the past 6 weeks to conduct a review of our operations and implement a variety of stringent measures to maintain a safe environment for our fans, performers, and crew. As an industry leader in this country, we took the time that lockdown gave us to listen, discuss, plan, and make meaningful changes. The steps we have taken include creating an official code of conduct and a dignity at work policy, which all performers and crew will be required to sign. Code of conduct for audience members will also be displayed at our events, and we will have points of contact for fans should they have any concerns. A welfare officer who is independent of the roster has been employed. All talent and staff will have direct access to them in person at shows and by phone and email during office hours. They are currently undergoing a series of modules to gain qualifications in understanding anxiety, depression, and CBT, well-being at work, an introduction, psychological and mental health beyond nature and nurture, improve your intercultural competence, people management skills, HR fundamentals, challenges in human resources management. Personnel checks will be carried out on all performers and crew. Any allegations made towards a performer or member of crew will be taken extremely seriously. Anyone charged with a crime will be suspended from ICW pending investigation. Anyone found guilty will be removed permanently. We would also like to make it clear we will not comment on individual cases as we could interfere with legal proceedings. In addition to the measures listed above, ICW supports Equity's 5 pledges for wrestling promotions and will adhere to having a clear and robust dignity at work policy, all transport and accommodation arrangements being agreed upon with talent in advance, a separate, private and secure dressing room space provided at every show, a paramedic being present at every show, all associated wrestling schools providing clear safeguarding policies. This year has brought about unprecedented change in professional wrestling, and as ICW moves forward with new measures in place, we've vowed to do everything in our power to keep our industry safe, fair, and strong for performers, staff, crew, and fans alike. That says everything that I think needs to be said from a wrestling company. What it doesn't do is address the allegations made towards the owner of the company. Whether these allegations are true or not, there are plenty of voices saying them, and some are worse than others. Some are basically just people being out having fun. However, when allegations are made about the boss of the company, there needs to be something official that happens in light of those, because who investigates the boss of the company when the boss of the company is in charge? In addition to that, there have been well-known allegations that people have admitted, and these staff members have remained with the company. In fact, I believe at least one member of that roster of staff, not performers, has a conviction and is still working there. And that's after the company decided to let him go in the wake of these allegations. The statement addresses everything that is needed. The simple fact is that several allegations include the fact that the boss of the company, Mark Dallas, allegedly knew about quite a lot of the allegations centered around his company and didn't act on them. What I think still needs to be addressed, despite this statement, is how people can accept and move on from the fact the person who is overseeing this is the person who oversaw the issues before. Oversaw? Overseen? Oversaw. The fact is, the boss who's been linked with several allegations has implemented a policy which on the surface addresses all of the wrongs. But if the allegations are to be taken seriously, then he himself should be under investigation and should, if found guilty, be liable for punishment, including removal from his own shows. The simple fact is, several of the allegations are very difficult to prove. Some of them, based on the conversations I've had with people who have had dealings with him in the past, are quite believable, even if they're not provable. ICW is a company that I know for a fact. I have one friend who is an ICW diehard, and his comments in relation to everything that came out was fuck ICW. They can come out with statements like this, and there are people that are still going to go to their shows. There are fans who knew about these allegations prior to them being all over Twitter and still attended their shows. That'll happen. But there's only so much a welfare officer and a code of conduct can do when the allegations have at times centered around those that run the company. For me, ICW perhaps can't address these, because the only way to address them would either be to call somebody a liar, which isn't a good look, or to admit them, which isn't a good look. ICW are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They at least have something in place for the future. I think there is some within the speaking out movement who have doubts about how far these measures will go. Having an independent welfare officer who is independent of the roster is a great move, because that's somebody that can oversee things. I think that person would need to be capable of calling out the boss as well. And I don't see a person being able to call out their boss without losing their job in situations like this. So hopefully there is a degree of autonomy for this role. And I'll name the boss. Now, Mark Dallas, when I've met him, has been a very nice guy. He's clearly passionate about his company, clearly passionate about his product. And when I heard the allegations, rather than me saying, oh, just another one, I was actually disappointed because I had higher hopes for ICW. I thought, every company has issues. Every company has things they need to fix. But I thought ICW were going to be one of the good ones. So for me, I'm still worried that the culture may not have changed, and the people who may have been victims of things in the past are not going to feel that this addresses the problem. They may feel it addresses the problem going forward, but there's at least one person I'm not going to name who's admitted the allegations that took place at an ICW show, and the bosses of the company have to take responsibility for that. I think there's been no mention of talents who are being removed from the roster. There was one very clear one that was removed from the roster, but there are allegations against several others. There's also people who have worked for ICW that I've seen live working for ICW that have made allegations, and it would be interesting to see if they're going to continue to work for them going forward, because these allegations also suggest bosses knew about things that were happening, maybe not allowing them to happen, but knew of the allegations and still continue to book these talents. So hopefully ICW over the past 6 weeks have had a very big change in attitude towards how they handle these things. I certainly think the drinking culture is something that, when I heard about it, was rather depressing, because you hear all these stories about Vince McMahon going drinking with the boys and girls, and you hear all these stories about other promoters drinking with talents, and it just seems like an opportunity for things to go wrong. It seems like something can be taken the wrong way. I know when I've got alcohol in my system, I can take things the wrong way, and perhaps jokey comments can be taken the wrong way. And certainly one allegation was that the promoter of ICW said that they were high whilst at a show, which is, I think, is unfair on the talent that they've hired. If the person in charge is out of their box on something, it certainly creates a situation that's a little bit more chaotic than it has to be. But if that allegation isn't true, but the allegation about the comment is true, even the joke itself has to be taken seriously. I would hope that the culture change of British wrestling is going to be for the positive. For me, it's great that organizations like Equity have become involved. It doesn't mean that there's unionization in British or Scottish wrestling, but what it does mean is that there is some involvement from a union that understands rights. So the 5 pledges, having a clear and robust dignity at work policy, that's something that, having previously worked for the NHS, is a must. You have to understand what is expected whilst you're at work. All transport and accommodation arrangements are arranged and agreed prior to the show. For me, that seems a given. The fact that that isn't always the case, for me, is worrying. For me, if you're booked to work on a show here in Aberdeen where I live, and you don't know how you're getting here or where you're going to be staying, that's a problem. So the fact that that's now something that companies are going to be tackling head on, brilliant. A separate, private and secure dressing room space being provided at every show. As far as I'm concerned, again, that should have been essential. There should have been a degree of separation, and not the big star gets a locker room, not the little star has to share with everybody else. I mean, some privacy for people would at least be ideal. If you're in a smaller venue, at least access to somewhere where people can get dressed in private, if there is only a communal dressing room, would certainly be a bare minimum. A paramedic being present at every show. Now, this is one that could be quite costly for certain promotions. However, again, during the Speaking Out movement, this is essential. The amount of shows where people get hurt and there isn't anybody there to look after them. A basic first aid certificate is not enough if somebody gets a neck injury or somebody gets knocked out cold. You need a proper paramedic there. As a bare minimum, I love this. This should be there because the most important thing at a wrestling show is the talent. Without them, there's nothing. They should be getting looked after. All associated wrestling schools providing clear safeguarding policies. In light of some allegations being made about trainers, this for me is an absolute must as well. To see companies like ICW coming out and making this declaration, regardless of what happened before, it means from now, I know this sucks for people who've been victims in the past, but from now, the company has publicly declared this. They have to be held to account. These high standards can only help British wrestling.